When you think of the Renaissance, your mind probably jumps to incredible art, right? Beautiful paintings, amazing architecture. But what you might not picture is the fierce battle that was raging behind the scenes. It wasn't on a battlefield with swords and armor. No, this was a tug of war in the world of medicine, a battle between centuries of tradition and a brand new kind of radical way of thinking about the human body.
So that brings up a really big question, and it's the whole point of this explainer. Was the Renaissance actually a golden age for medicine? Or was progress, a lot slower and way more complicated than we tend to think? Let's dig in and find out.
So here's how we're going to tackle that. First, we'll ask what rebirth even meant. Then, we'll look at the things that were pushing for change and the old ideas that were holding it back. We'll also see why new knowledge didn't automatically mean new cures. And finally, we'll figure out how this whole period laid the groundwork for the medicine we have today. Okay, first up, a time of rebirth. Let's explore how looking back at the past actually, weirdly enough, inspired a whole new future. So the word Renaissance, it literally just means rebirth. We're talking about a period in Europe, roughly from 1500 to 1700, where people got totally obsessed with the amazing stuff the ancient Greeks and Romans had figured out. All this knowledge had been kind of lost or ignored for centuries, and now it was back. And this whole rebirth thing kind of happened in three big steps. It all started with art. People saw these incredibly realistic statues from ancient times and thought, we've got to learn how to do that. So, step two, they started studying the human body in crazy detail to make their art better. And that's when things got really interesting, leading right to step three. People started looking at the ancient medical books and asking, hey, wait a minute, are these guys actually right about everything? And this was the huge shift. A brand new scientific spirit started to bubble up. Thinkers, artists, guys like Leonardo da Vinci, they started saying, look, you can't just trust what's written in some dusty old book. You got to get out there and observe the world for yourself. So what was actually pushing this new way of thinking? Well, that brings us right to section 2, the engines of progress that really started to get things moving. And one of the biggest engines was technology. On the left, you're looking at an early printing press. This invention was an absolute game changer. All of a sudden, books with incredibly detailed, super accurate drawings of the human body, like this one on the right from a famous book by Vesalius, could be printed and spread all over Europe. Knowledge could basically go viral for the first time ever. This new spirit of see it for yourself created some real medical rebels. You had Andreas Vesalius, who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty dissecting actual human bodies, and he proved that the great ancient Dr. Galen had gotten a bunch of things wrong. Out on the battlefield, a surgeon named Ambroise Paré ditched horrible old treatments like pouring boiling oil on wounds and came up with much gentler, better ways to help soldiers. And then there was William Harvey, who proved through careful experiments that blood actually circulates all around the body, pumped by the heart. Just incredible stuff. And it wasn't just these brilliant individuals working alone. The whole atmosphere was changing. New groups are popping up, like the Royal Society, where people could share and argue about new experimental ideas. Amazing new technology, like the microscope, literally opened up whole new worlds people didn't even know existed. And sometimes, inspiration came from weird places. Even an everyday invention like a water pump got people like Harvey thinking, maybe the heart works like that too. But, and this is a really, really big but, progress was so slow. And that brings us to section 3, the grip of the past. Let's talk about why it was so hard to get new ideas to stick. The biggest roadblock, by far, was this guy, Galen. He was an ancient Roman doctor, and for more than 1,000 years, his writings were treated like they were absolutely perfect. The church supported his ideas, so they became the foundation for all medical training. If you were a doctor and you dared to challenge Galen, you weren't just questioning one guy. You were questioning the entire system. And then you had the massive power of the church itself. The teaching was that God was in control of everything, and that included sickness and health. So trying to figure out the scientific causes of disease wasn't always encouraged. This went hand in hand with all sorts of superstitions. For example, get this. Over 90,000 people went to see King Charles II because they truly believed that just a simple touch from the king could cure them of their diseases. Wild. And on top of all that, there were some real day-to-day barriers. For starters, there just weren't that many properly trained doctors or scientists around to even test these new ideas. Plus, the main theory about what caused sickness, the ancient idea of the four humors, was still what everyone believed. And here's a tricky one. Some of the old school herbal remedies actually worked. So if you're a patient, why would you trust some radical new idea when the old stuff sometimes did the trick? So all of this leads us to a super important point. Section 4, knowledge versus cures. Because, as it turns out, just discovering how something works is a totally different thing from knowing how to fix it. William Harvey, the guy who discovered blood circulation, actually explained this problem perfectly himself. He wrote that a lot of doctors were against his new idea because they are unable to solve medical problems with it or in curing diseases. Think about that. He'd made this huge, revolutionary discovery, but he couldn't use it to make a single sick person better. So what did this mean for the average person on the street? Well, honestly, not much changed. Even with all this amazing new knowledge about anatomy, day-to-day medicine was pretty much the same. If you got sick in, say, 1650, your doctor was still going to try to balance your four humors, probably by bleeding you, just like a doctor would have done in 1450. Let's just be super clear about this because it's the key takeaway. These incredible breakthroughs in knowledge did not immediately change medical practice. Okay, so after all that, where do we land? Let's pull everything together in our final section, Foundations for the Future, and come to a verdict on Renaissance medicine. You can really see it now, can't you? It was this constant tug of war. On one side, pulling medicine into the future, you had things like the scientific method, the printing press, and a few brilliant individuals. But pulling it right back into the past, you had the massive power of the church, the unshakable authority of Galen, and just plain old superstition and tradition. And this brings us to the real, lasting legacy of the period. No, the Renaissance didn't revolutionize treatments, but it did something that was arguably way more important. It completely revolutionized thinking. That was the real gift. The Renaissance left behind a whole new toolkit for the doctors and scientists who would come later. It gave them a passion for observation and experimentation. It gave them accurate, detailed maps of the human body. And maybe the most important tool of all, it gave them the courage to challenge old authorities and look for a better way. So, to wrap it all up, think about it like this. The new ideas of the Renaissance couldn't stop the terrifying plagues of their time, but it makes you wonder, right? Could we possibly have something like a COVID vaccine today without that fundamental shift in thinking that started all those centuries ago?